Good afternoon again, everyone. We're so fortunate to have Mr. Peter Friedman to speak with us today. He has researched for the last 50 years on Islam. He is a past law enforcement firearms instructor as well. He is a flight instructor and other very interesting involvements that he has been doing all his life. And today he's going to speak on Sharia finance and how it is influencing America. Mr. Friedman, welcome.
Thank you very much for inviting me up here. Can everybody hear? I wish we had some grapes over there. It would make things a little bit better, but I think everybody will be able to see. I appreciate always being in front of Republican women. I think you guys are the best looking and the most intelligent. And I have to tell you, as a firearms instructor, I love training Republican women, along with the lovely Rose over here, who is a co-instructor with me, 24 hours a day. Should add that. It was a great shot. Anyway, I'm up here today talking about Sharia finance. I have been studying Islam since I was about 13 years old. And if you kind of add the 50 years to that, you get some kind of an idea that I'm dating myself. I love this statement here. I have some very good Republican credentials. I was one of Ronald Reagan's 2 pilots when he ran for president. And we used to fly him up and down the state of California, and he would make stump speeches, of course, and we would stop in all the garden spots like Merced, Modesto, Fresno, Bakersfield. Merced is an interesting place. I think if they ever did the state of Enema, that's where the tube is going to go. But I will tell you that I was absolutely enamored of that man. He was the most decent human being I had ever met. And one of the reasons, of course, was every time we would stop somewhere, he would make sure that the catering truck came out to feed the 2 of us before he even got off the plane. Now that could be a two-edged sword. He might have not wanted to fly with 200 pilots, or he wanted to feed his horse first as a kid cowboy. And Nancy, by the way, was just, she was amazing too. She protected that man, and he loved every bit of it. Anyway, Reagan once said, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. I have a website, by the way, that's been up for about 2.5 years now, maybe 3. It's called IslamThreat.com. Everything I'm going to tell you today, you will actually find on that website, including a whole lot more. If anybody here has been to it, you know what's on there. Let's see if I can get this to work. It works. All right, this is one of my favorite statements. It actually was first uttered by Albert Einstein. We have become so tolerant that we tolerate those who will not tolerate us. One of the things that is killing us in the United States of America is our Judeo-Christian ethics. Just because somebody decides to call their ideology a religion, they claim protection under the First Amendment. Regardless of what the ideology is, even if that ideology espouses world domination under one particular ideology and faith. That's what we're dealing with, and we are winding up killing ourselves over this whole thing. What I'm going to tell you today has to do with, what the Quran says. And everybody that you see on television, and you go to these interfaith dialogues, which are absolute garbage. There is no interfaith with the Muslim community. There are no moderate Muslims because Islam is not moderate. You cannot reform Islam like Christianity went through 500 years ago with the Reformation. That can't physically happen. I always try to explain to people, if you took everything out of the Old Testament, and you could only keep one thing that would allow people to live peacefully with their neighbors, it would probably be the 10 Commandments. If you took the New Testament and you took everything out of the New Testament except one thing that would allow people to live peacefully with their neighbors, I believe it's Matthew 5, the Sermon on the Mount. Not bad for a nice little Jewish kid, huh? Okay, we can continue down that path. Yes?
I'm so sorry. Please didn't listen.
That's fine. I'll talk over it.
Here we go.
I always noticed on American Idol, the music always overpowers the singer.
Yes.
I think they do that on purpose. Anyway, there's nothing that you can take out of the Quran. There is nothing you can take out of Islam because the Muslims believe that Islam is divine. That they believe that every word in the Quran, all 6,247 verses, 114 chapters, comes directly from their God. And I use the word their advisedly because it is not the extension of the Abrahamic faith. It is not the extension of Judaism and Christianity. And that's what they would like you to believe. There are so many scriptural errors that come from the Old and New Testaments in the Quran, you would have thought God would have got it right. And the errors are amazing that are in there. So-and-so married to so-and-so, and it never occurred. One of the reasons why Muslims will tell you that there is the Quran, there is Islam, because in the Quran it states specifically that it came on the scene here around 600 AD because the Jews and the Christians corrupted their scriptures. Well, in 1947, if you remember, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Qumran in Jordan, in a cave, and it turns out that those 3,000-year-old parchments are identical to what we have today. So it was not corrupted. Everything in the Quran is a religious obligation on the part of a Muslim. Now, I see this guy, Judy Zasser, all the time, and he's on TV, he's on with Hannity, and he talks about reforming Islam. He was in the American Navy, and he doesn't understand his own ideology. You cannot reform anything in here because every word in this book for the last 1,400 years comes directly from Allah. So how would you edit Allah? And that's always my #1 question every time I get into a debate with a Muslim. Do you believe that every word in the Quran comes directly from Allah? And they must answer yes. And then we have some fun. If you go on my website, I have under Solutions on the menu bar 10 questions. And all you have to do is ask anybody those 10 questions, and they can't answer them. First question, Book 2, verse 191 in the Quran says, kill all Jews and Christians wherever you find them. And then they say, well, you're misinterpreting the Arabic. And my retort to that would be, you know all the bombers, the suicide bombers in the Middle East? Are they reading the Quran in English or in Arabic? And that ends that conversation. So the Arabic is correct. The first English translation was in 1734 by a man named George Sale over in Britain. And he lived over there in the Middle East, in the Holy Land, for many, many years, and spoke fluent Arabic, and he did the first translation. Well, the translation in 200 years hasn't changed. And nobody has objected from the Muslim community that George Sale got it wrong. So the foundation of Sharia law comes directly from the Quran. There are things in there like you have Book 4, verse 34, which requires a husband to beat his wife if she denies him anything. And the main thrust of being a Muslim woman is sex. She is not required by the Quran to do anything else. Raise the kids, wash the clothes, clean the house. No. He comes home, he feels frisky, she cannot deny him. That's a great sin under Islam. And he may beat her. Book 4, verse 34. You can read it for yourself. The basic Islamic belief is that the Quran is the Word of God because it says so. Well, wait a minute. That's a circular argument. That's a circular argument. If you believe what the Quran says, because the very first verse in the Quran in chapter 1 says, this is the Holy Quran, this is the Word of God, and everything in here is true. Then you have have to accept everything else. Well, you can't argue reasonably with a person with that kind of a belief. Especially when you get to some of these chapters and verses in there, like book 9, verse 29, that says to subdue all of the non-believers until they either pay the extortion tax to be allowed to remain alive, accept Islam, or they have to die because they're of no value to Islam. And the interesting part about book 9, verse 29, it's kind of like a Monty Python, then with 3 doors, or a Monty Hall, rather, with 3 doors. Door number 1, you accept Islam, they leave you alone. Door number 2, only if you're a Jew or a Christian are you allowed to pay the extortion tax, and every Friday afternoon, of course, Ahmed, okay, will visit your home or your business with the envelope, just like the mafia. If you're a Hindu or someone else without a scripture described in the Quran, such as a Jew or a Christian, Old Testament, New Testament, you only have door 1 and door 3. You either accept Islam or we kill you because you're of no value to us whatsoever. So all of this stuff you hear on television basically is a bunch of baloney. In Arabic it's called taqiyya. I would use another word, but he's taking it. Since the Quran says it's the Word of God, whatever it says must be true. That's what they believe. Islam sees the world as an open-ended conflict between what's called Dar al-Islam, Dar in Arabic meaning the land, Dar al-meaning all, the land of Islam where Muslims control, and the Dar al-Harb, which is the land of conflict where the non-believers live, where the infidels live. That's us. And the ideology in the Quran states that Muslims must travel and emigrate from Dar al-Islam and spread the word and infiltrate in Dar al-Harb. And that's what's going on here in the United States. And people, because they have become a tremendous voting bloc, and they have a lot of petrodollars, especially dumped into America by the Saudis, they are building mosques everywhere. One of my first questions when this IRS thing broke, and they were targeting conservative 501c3 groups, my first question was, gee whiz, I wonder if mosques had the same problem getting tax-exempt status. The answer is no. What's even more interesting is we just found out that Obama's half-brother got a 501c3 last year in 3 weeks. Now go find that out on the news. That's one of our problems. We cannot coexist in our democracy with Islam because we have a separation here of church and state based on a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote years ago, which is incorrect and misinterpreted, but we cannot coexist with an ideology that is the church and the state together. Political Islam and religious Islam are one and the same. So the prime directive in the Quran is to make sure that Islam spreads itself worldwide. They're very big on dates, by the way. Does anybody know where the date 9/11 came from in Islamic history? We were attacked in 2001 on September 11th. Okay, here's the answer to the Jeopardy question. On September 11th, 1683, the Muslim armies that had invaded Western Europe were finally defeated at the gates of Vienna. These guys hold a grudge. 400 years ago, 1683, the Muslim armies were finally defeated at the gates of Vienna, and they had to totally retreat back to where they came from. You recall, after Obama got elected, the first major speech he gave was in Cairo on June 4th, 2009. He gave that speech at Al-Azhar University, which, by the way, happens to be where the Muslim Brotherhood was created in 1928 by a man named Hassan al-Banna. And that was after World War I, when the Ottoman Empire went down to defeat and was completely disbanded. Hassan al-Banna wanted to resurrect the Ottoman Empire and the Caliphate. Does that sound familiar? This is what's going on across the Middle East today. So why did Obama make his speech specifically on June 4th, 2009, where the Muslim Brotherhood was created in Cairo, Egypt, and having invited the Muslim Brotherhood to attend his speech after they had been outlawed by Mubarak and Gamal Abdel Nasser for over 40 years? He invited them to come and attend the speech. Anybody know what happened in 1967 on June 4th? The Six-Day Israeli War. June 4th, the Israeli Air Force wiped out the Egyptian army. They destroyed 800 tanks on June 4th, 1967 in the Sinai. Do you suppose the fact that Obama made his speech on June 4th in Cairo at Al-Azhar University was some kind of code? Suppose he was trying to tell the Muslim world something? Like, I'm on your side? And then all of a sudden, right after that, we saw what happened with Mubarak. Mubarak went down to defeat. Very interesting how that Arab Spring got started. The Arabic word for BS is the word taqiyya in Arabic. So every time you hear some Muslim on television or the radio that's talking passively and how Islam is a religion of peace. It's like Hitler. He wanted peace too. He wanted peace of Poland, peace of Czechoslovakia. This is what's going on. It's called taqiyya. Don't step in the taqiyya if you're not careful, okay? So we get into jihad. Now, I'm always hearing Muslims say, well, wait a minute. Jihad doesn't necessarily mean holy war. More taqiyya. They say, well, there's the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. I just heard that on TV from some guy the other night. Well, the greater jihad, and this is what Obama said a week ago in a press conference. Well, jihad, has different meanings. He was talking to people in India. I don't know if you saw that. There was a whole clip there of him talking to students in India who were Hindu about what happened in Mumbai or Bombay when the attack took place there a couple of years ago. And he said, well, there's lots of interpretations of jihad. You can always tell when Obama's lying because his lips are moving. It's amazing. I don't know if anybody heard the press conference this morning. More taqiyya. Unbelievable. So what happened was, Obama's out there and he's saying, well, no, there's the greater jihad and the lesser jihad. Okay, what's the greater jihad? The greater jihad is a Muslim's internal struggle for their soul. Okay, what's the lesser jihad? Oh, well, that's holy war. If we don't get what we want, we're going to kill you and burn the village and whatever else it may take. Now, what's interesting is, when you get past the Quran, which is the top of the religious pyramid in Islam, the next holiest book is called the Hadith. The Hadith are the sayings of Muhammad. Now, years ago, what happened was a bunch of the guys got together after Muhammad's death, and they said, look, we don't want to lose all of this information that Muhammad gave us, so if you were in his presence and asked him a question, please tell us what the question was, write it down, and tell us the answer that he gave you. And that's where the Hadith comes from. Well, the main Hadith is the Hadith of Bukhari. It's a man who used to hang around with Muhammad. So Bukhari is the #1 go-to guy for the sayings of Muhammad. In there, he's got his volumes. There's 9 volumes of the Bukhari Hadith. They're all on my website. If you go to volume 9, you go to book 52, it talks about jihad, holy war. And I always like to ask Muslims, well, where's the book in the Hadith about jihad the greater? Oh, well, that's not in there. Don't get misled. Don't get fooled. We would all like to be in denial, and we would like to believe that these people who live around the corner from us, who we see in the mall all the time, the grocery store, that they're peaceful and they don't mean us any harm. That's a bunch of nonsense. It is a bunch of tequila. The book says world domination under Islam. Period. Read the book. Nobody wants to read the book. All you got to do is read the book. Don't listen to somebody who tells you what's in the book. Read the book for yourself. On my website, under Qurans, the very first thing you will click on is a Quran index. I read the Quran 3 or 4 times a year just to stay up on it. Not because it's revised, I just don't want to forget anything. I'm starting to mature a little bit. I don't have CRS yet, but I need to be able to continue to quote page and verse, paragraph and verse, chapter and verse, because that's the only way that you can rebut any of these arguments. You have to know it better than they do. Well, it's in there. Show me. Show me the verse. And they can't do it. Now, when you go into the Quran, it specifically talks about how you perform jihad. And you could go read this again in Volume 9, Book 52 of the Hadith. You perform jihad not only with your arms, but with your wealth. And that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Sharia law is a political, military, financial, and judicial system that has to replace any other system in any country where they infiltrate. And they are doing it here in America. They're in our judicial system. They're in our military. Everybody remember Major Hassan at Fort Hood? Workplace violence? Tequila. Now you can tell your neighbors, oh, be careful, don't step in the tequila. That's what we're dealing with. The problem with our administration today is that they have a narrative about the Islamic world. Look at what's going on with Benghazi. I don't think those were right-wing Christians that killed our ambassador. Okay? When was the last time somebody from the Jewish faith, Judaism, went and hijacked an airplane? Okay? There's only one element doing it. Period. Now, what's interesting, are there any stockbrokers in the room? Well, right now they're broker than most. I want to explain how this occurred and what we're dealing with here. There was a Holy Land Foundation prosecution back in 2008 by the FBI. All of a sudden we discovered there were a bunch of Islamic charities that were around the United States that were collecting money and they were financing terrorism with those funds. One of them in Virginia was the Holy Land Foundation. They were funneling millions of dollars out of the United States to Hamas, to Hezbollah, and to Al-Qaeda. Part of that investigation uncovered this document, which was in the homes of a number of the people who were prosecuted. This document is an explanatory memorandum on the general strategic goal for the group in North America, and the scary part, it's dated May 22nd, 1991. They've had a 22-year jump on us. There have been some of us who have been yelling about this now for 30 years. Nobody listened. No, that's the world's third greatest religion. Let me tell you something about that. It's true, there's about 1.5 billion, 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. If only 1% are radical and take the Quran seriously, we're looking at 10.5 million crazy people. Do the math. 1.5. 1% of 1.5 is 10 million. They've got the largest army in the world. So this document came out. It's in total up on my website. There's 36 pages. The first 18 pages are in Arabic. The second 18 pages are the English translation for people in the Western world who don't speak Arabic. And what it does is it details all of these things they want to do while they are infiltrating America. They have to set up groups that will infiltrate the military. Okay, we have 15,000 radical Muslims today that are part of our army. That's nuts. Why do we have Muslims, radical Muslims, in our army when we're over there fighting a war in the Middle East in a Muslim country? Gee, you could have predicted this. Then we have our joint chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey, who is a complete idiot. Well, he's exemplified that over the Benghazi issue now in the last couple of months. But after Fort Hood, he had a press conference about Major Hassan in which he said, gee, I hope what happened in Fort Hood doesn't change our diversity program in the Army. Did you ever hear any more about the sergeant who threw the hand grenade in Iraq into the tent and killed a bunch of our officers? An American sergeant? Nah, he disappeared real quick. We have a problem with the narrative. So here are all of these different groups that have to be set up. Judicial, scientific, legal. All of these groups are to be set up in the United States. CARE, Council on America-Islamic Relations. Remember, this document came over to America in 1991. CARE didn't come into existence until 1994 during Clinton. That came into existence because Americans at that time had the stones to start pushing back. So they had to set up this Muslim advocacy legal entity to start suing people who were trying to stop the Muslim infiltration into America. That's where CARE came from, the Council on American-Islamic Relations. Now, the back page lists 29 entities that were already here in America subverting what's going on here back in 1991. The oldest one is the Muslim Students Association. Chico State, New College, Muslim Students Association. Our esteemed governor of California several years ago, Arnold Schwarzenegger, decided that he was going to allow the Muslim Students Association at San Francisco State to take over the entire student union and run all student activities at San Francisco State. They are the only entity on campus that doesn't pay any rent on their facilities. Somebody better wake up. Somebody better wake up, because I don't think any of you nice ladies in here are going to look good in a burqa. All of these 29 entities that were already here, and there's over 100 of them today, but all 29 entities in the Holy Land Foundation were designated by the Justice Department as unindicted co-conspirators in funding terrorism. Now, one of the people on here, or one of the groups on here, is the Islamic Society of North America, ISNA. When Obama moved into the White House in January of 2009, the first person he brought with him was a woman called Dalia Moged. Go Google her. The hijab and the niqab and the whole 9 yards. She's got her own office in the West Wing of the White House, and he tapped her to be his liaison to the Muslim world. Unindicted co-conspirator. Peter King, a representative from New York here, last year sent a letter to what passes for our Attorney General, and he said, look, he said, these guys have been unindicted co-conspirators now for about 5 years. How about indicting them? And King never got a response. Never got a response. They're still out there, and they're still in there doing what they came here to do, regardless of the smoking gun. The Muslim Brotherhood, who we are supporting all over the Muslim world, who we supported in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood promised we would not run a candidate to replace Mubarak, and now we get Morsi, who represents the Muslim Brotherhood. This is the Muslim Brotherhood credo. Allah is our goal, the Prophet is our guide, the Quran is our constitution. Remember I told you, no separation of church and state. Jihad is our way. That's not the internal struggle for my soul. Trust me. Death for the glory of Allah is our greatest ambition. That hasn't changed. Morsi's got a plaque like that that sits on the wall in his office. But we just gave him $2.6 billion, 130 M1 tanks, and a couple of F-16s to go fly around. What are we doing? Who is Egypt's enemy? Israel? Muslim Students Association last summer, they held a convention, a conference. At UCLA, our colleges stink with this stuff. Down at UCLA, they have 2,000 Muslim members of the Muslim Students Association who are going to school on scholarships paid by our tax dollars. And at the end of that rally they had down there, they all got up, just like good little Hitler Youth did 50 years ago, and they said, I pledge Allah is my Lord, Quran is my guide, Jihad is my spirit. We're back to this internal struggle again? I don't think so. Righteousness is my character, paradise is my goal. That's interesting. By the way, there is nothing in the Quran that talks about 72 virgins. That's all made up. For I command what is right, forbid what is wrong, I will fight against oppression and will die to establish Islam. They're here. Remember the movie Poltergeist? They're here. So now, we have a new financial jihad. Anybody aware of the Dow Jones Islamic Index? Didn't know that, did you? I love it when I get some stockbrokers in the room and I go, why don't you tell everybody about the Dow Jones Islamic Index? The what? How do you know you, with a portfolio or a 401k or some kind of an annuity, aren't funding terrorism? You don't know. Why don't you ask your broker? Hey, do I have any Sharia-compliant funds in my portfolio? Because if you do, that fund is taking 2.5% off the top, and they're sending it through Sharia advisory boards to the Middle East charities who fund terrorism. This is all proven. It's all right there on my website. We have now heard about Inspire magazine, right? Benghazi and the two Tsarnaev brothers, and they were inspired by Al-Qaeda's really fancy Inspire magazine. Well, here's volume 1. The ruling on dispossessing the disbelievers, that's us, wealth in Dar al-Harb. Jesus, it's out there. All somebody's got to do is get rid of the cranial rectal inversion and take a look. This is what's going on. You're going to have to start paying attention. All we're getting here is the tip of a very large iceberg. And the government and the media are not helping because they are trying to push this narrative. There will never, ever be peace between the Muslims and the rest of us. It's antithetical to the religious obligations in the Quran. If they believe in the Quran, they want to kill you. That's it. Done. Don't believe any of the taqiyya that you hear, because it isn't true. See this? A fatwa, which is a legal opinion, by Al-Azhar University, where Obama made his very first speech after his election on June 4, 2009, endorses Al-Qaeda's financial jihad. What the hell is going on? You're being lied to, you're being manipulated to push somebody else's narrative. 3 doors. 3 doors. That's it. Convert, be taxed, still allowed to be lived, stay alive, or die. Done. That's it. That's all you need to know. Sharia-compliant banks. What banks are providing Sharia-compliant Muslim loans and mortgages right now? Citibank, Barclays, Goldman Sachs, HSBC, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, Morgan Stanley, UBS. Just go ask them. That's all you got to do. Hi, I need a Muslim mortgage to buy a new house. Oh, no problem. Come on in. We'll give you our Muslim person over here, and they'll tell you exactly how you can get a Muslim mortgage that doesn't charge interest. I love it. Because in the Quran it says you can't pay interest if you're a Muslim. That's illegal. Well, wait a minute. How do you get the mortgage? Who makes the profit? Allah says profit is good. So instead of calling it interest, the Muslims then call it profit. Like Allah doesn't know. We're going to fool Allah. We're not going to call it interest, but we got to make a buck. So we're going to just call it profit. So if you want to buy a home and you get a $100,000 mortgage, the bank's entitled to make 10% profit on that, but we don't call it interest. Now what would be interesting to know, since the IRS gets involved, is whether they deduct that interest on their income tax. The Dow Jones Islamic Market Index. There's a ticker symbol, IMANX. Let's go look it up. You can't make this stuff up. Look it up. The Amana Funds, AMANX, the Dow Jones Islamic Index. Now what's interesting is that the man who used to be the chairman of the advisory board of the Dow Jones Islamic Index was thrown out of the United States. Sheikh Taqi Usmani, who is one of the guys who tried to convince the Taliban not to give us Osama bin Laden. He used to live in America, but now he's got to go and live back in Pakistan where he was a Supreme Court judge. But, government, I don't want to tell you this. Just look it up. Here's a sample of the current Islamic funds. There's over 1,000 of them on the Dow Jones. These are Islamic funds. We have over $1.5 trillion today of Muslim money invested in our stock market. You kind of notice how the market's going up?
Yeah.
Petrodollars coming back over here, getting that increase, making the profit in the market, as Ben Bernanke is printing dollars as quick as he can print them. And what's happening is every one of these funds, by Muslim law in the Quran, must donate 2.5% of their profits annually to Muslim charities that are manipulated by guys like Taqi Usmani over in Pakistan. Where do you think he sends the money? This is all on my website. Here's one of the Dow Jones Islamic Index funds. It's called JETS, Dow Jones Islamic Market International Index Fund. You get the prospectus. Anybody here ever read your prospectus out of your portfolio? You go to invest. Every one of these funds, these Islamic funds, is in violation of federal law, the SEC Acts of 1933 and 1934, which require a disclosure of risk to you as the investor. And all that they say, this comes right out of that prospectus. Islamic Sharia investment risks. It says the risk of the possibility that the Islamic Sharia restrictions, and I'll tell you what those are, placed on investments and reflected in the principal investment strategies may result in the fund not performing as well as mutual funds not subject to such restrictions. Okay, so if you have a Sharia-compliant investment fund, what are the restrictions? Well, you can't invest in Oscar Mayer. You can't invest in anything having to do with pigs, dogs, alcohol, but it is okay to invest in any armament companies, not Boeing, not Lockheed, but you can invest in an Iranian fund building an atomic bomb. That's good. but they don't disclose that, which is one of the problems. Okay, so here's my favorite guy with the single tooth. Justice Mufti Taqi Usmani, former Supreme Court Justice in Pakistan. He is the guy who wrote several years ago the blasphemy law in Pakistan, where you lose your head if you blaspheme either the Prophet or the faith, one or the other. This was the guy who was the chairman of the Sharia Advisory Board for the Dow Jones. Now, how many people here used to watch Glenn Beck on Fox?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Not going to ask you how many paid him to watch Glenn Beck, but when he was on Fox, you know why he had to leave Fox? Because News Corp is owned by Rupert Murdoch.
Yes.
Rupert Murdoch owns the Wall Street Journal. He owns the Dow Jones. Rupert Murdoch sold a portion of News Corp to a sheikh who happens to be the nephew of the King of Saudi Arabia. This wasn't in the newspaper. It's all on my website. Al-Walid bin Talal. He bought part of Rupert Murdoch's broadcast empire. Well, he didn't like what Glenn Beck was saying. So Glenn Beck wasn't going to get his contract renewed, so Beck decided he was going to leave. Now, who was Al-Walid bin Talal? He is not only the nephew of the King of Saudi Arabia, but he's also the guy after 9/11, back in 2001, tried to give Rudy Giuliani, if you remember, a check for $10 million. And God bless Rudy Giuliani, he told him to take his check and get out of town. Didn't take the money. But since that time, Al-Walid bin Talal has done several things. First of all, he gave Elena Kagan $20 million when she was the president of Harvard Law School to set up the Islamic Studies program. He also gave $20 million to John Esposito at Georgetown. As far as I'm concerned, you can blow up Georgetown and you can blow up Harvard and hit Columbia with it.
You didn't mean that literally.
No, of course not. Shut it down.
There you go.
Yeah, that was a metaphor. Good old Taqi Usmani. Here's his resume. He was a delegate to the Taliban in 2001 by the Pakistan Secret Service, who we're still messing around with, or who's still messing around with us, to prevent the U.S. from seizing bin Laden. He was sent by Pakistan to the Taliban, specifically in Afghanistan, saying, don't give up bin Laden. He's a guest of yours. The Quran says that you cannot betray a guest. If you go to his website, albalad.net, which is located in Garden Grove, California, you can buy all the jihadist materials and literature that you want. He's a former chairman of the Dow Jones Islamic Fund Sharia Board, chairman of, get this now, Guidance Financial, GuidanceResidential.com. They are the largest entity in the United States funding Muslim single-family home mortgages. And he's the chairman of their Sharia Advisory Board. So every time they give a mortgage to a Muslim out of Guidance Residential, which is funded by the Bank of Bahrain, 2.5% has to go through Taqi Usmani, and he gives it to terrorists. You gotta love it. Chairman. He's the chairman of the Citi Islamic Investment Bank in Bahrain. That's Citibank. I don't do any business with Citibank. He's a member of 16 Sharia advisory boards, and he gets $50,000 a year from each one of them. You suppose for about $800,000 a year you could live decently in Pakistan? You can probably buy Pakistan. It goes on and on and on. Our Capita. He's a member of the Our Capita Sharia Advisory Board. Our Capita is pretty slick. If you Google ourcapita.com, they are also involved in Islamic investments in the United States. It used to be called Crescent Capital, but they thought that would draw too much attention. So they shortened it to Our Capita, and the AR part stands for Arab Capital. Anyway, just goes on and on. You can go to the website. You can either read or download what he wrote. The guy's still alive. He's 80 years old. Wrote a book called Islam and Modernism. And in there he says, hey, we don't want to westernize. We want to modernize. That's what's going on in Iran today with their nuclear program. They don't want to westernize the way the Shah tried to do it. They just want to modernize and get the most modern, sophisticated weapons they can. Gee, I wonder why. This is some of the things that Usmani has written in Islam and Modernism. Jihad is obligatory against hostile, non-compromising, non-Muslim states, if the Muslims have the power to carry it out. The guy's alive. This is what this guy is telling everybody. I don't think he's talking about the greater jihad and the struggle for somebody's soul. He's talking about the jihad is obligatory against non-compromising, non-Muslim states. That's war. That's holy war. I'm going to go through this in the interest of time. You can read it for yourself. Okay, so here's the picture of the usual suspects. These 6 guys here are the top financial Sharia advisors in the world. Here's our one-tooth cat over here, Taki Usmani. Okay? It's like a graduation picture. And here, in the back, this nice, kindly-looking guy over here, looks like everybody's grandfather, is Sheikh Yusuf Talal de Lorenzo. And when I ran across this guy, I'm going, wait a minute, de Lorenzo? De Lorenzo, that's not an Arabic name. No, he was born in Massachusetts. He's of Sicilian descent. His parents immigrated here from Sicily. But he became this Islamic financial scholar, and he's now one of the 6 top Sharia advisory board members on a whole bunch of United States companies. However, here's what's interesting about him. See number 2? Zia-ul-Haq. Everybody here see the movie Charlie Wilson's War? Remember that? Remember the scene where the guy is in the white robe, he's got the big handlebar mustache? That was Zia-ul-Haq. Zia-ul-Haq, in fact, did kill Bhutto. It's kind of what that lady said. Who was the actress in that? Julia Roberts. Yeah, she played the lady from Houston, and first thing she got up in that luncheon she gave. Zia did not kill Bhutto. Well, in fact, he did. He tried it, then he hung him. Okay. What is really interesting is that this guy, De Lorenzo, born in Massachusetts, who sits on half a dozen American company Sharia advisory boards, is the guy who went over there and created the Taliban in Pakistan in the early 80s to help Zia-ul-Haq radicalize Pakistan. Now, why we send $1 to Pakistan is beyond me. Okay, I think we ought to just get the nuclear weapons they have and be done with it. He's been affiliated with the Muslim Brotherhood, and he was one of the head guys in the Muslim Students Association over here in America. He was their go-to guy. He started the Army Muslim Chaplain Program. He doesn't live here anymore. He lives in Dubai. But he still sits on 6 American company Sharia advisory boards over here. But it gets worse. Tip of the iceberg. You're going to love this. As Beck says, blood will come out of your eyes. In 2004, the United States Treasury issued a press release appearing on the Treasury's website. 2004. It's still there, but you got to dig for it a little bit. Quote, the U.S. government places significant importance on promoting Islamic finance. Thank you, George Bush. That's what started this whole financial mess. November 6, 2008. Gee whiz, that was only 3 days after the election that elected Obama originally, right? The United States Treasury and this whole program for that seminar is on my website. Read it for yourself. In association, the Treasury Department, in association with the Islamic Finance Project, Harvard Law School. Okay, now let's think about that. Who was the president of Harvard Law School in November of 2008? Elena Kagan. Connect the dots. Just prior to this, Al-Walid bin Talal gave her and Larry Summers, remember him? He became the chairman of Obama's economic advisors right after the election. You smell something there? Okay? Gave $20 million at Harvard Law School to set up the Islamic Finance Project. So based upon the Treasury's press release in 2004, 4 years later now, we find this incestuous relationship between Harvard Law School and the Islamic Studies program and the United States Treasury. That gets better. Gets better. The title of the seminar was Islamic Finance 101. These guys smell money. We need to bring this into America because this is going to bring dollars or whatever they, rubles or rupees or what, it's going to bring that money into America so that we can play with it, right? There was a seminar. This is the page 1 of the program for the seminar. If you go down to the bottom, one of the 3 keynote speakers was Joseph Talal de Lorenzo, the man who created the Taliban. At the United States Treasury, in the Islamic Finance 101 seminar, sponsored by Elena Kagan, who became the Solicitor General under Obama as payback, and then became a Justice of the Supreme Court. We're stuck with her for at least 30 years. You see something here? You see a pattern here? So we have the guy here who is one of the 3 keynote speakers on Islamic finance who can't even live in this country anymore. He had to leave and go to Dubai, who sits on the Sharia Advisory Board of 6 American businesses in this country, created the Taliban, and he is one of the 3 keynote speakers at our U.S. Treasury seminar, Islamic Finance 101. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, not a single Republican asked her anything about this at her nomination hearing. Not a single question. Nobody asked about her thesis that she wrote at Princeton University on the advantages and the benefits of socialism. That was her senior college thesis. We better find some people with some stones, otherwise we're done. Kagan was running Harvard Law School with Larry Summers. They accepted $20 million by Al-Walid bin Talal. Al-Walid bin Talal, by the way, is one of the guys who financed Obama's education through Columbia and Harvard. You didn't know that, did you? Here is our capital, ourcapita.com. These are some of the people in that investment group under our capita that they fund. Pods. You know the containers, you see them going down the road, you can rent the pods. It's a great big box. You can put it in your driveway and you can put all kinds of stuff in there. They'll come pick it up and they'll store it for you. Pods is owned by the Muslims. They're owned by the Muslims. 2.5%, keep this in mind, 2.5% of the profits have to be donated to Islamic charities through guys like Mufti, Kaki Usmani, and De Lorenzo. All of these guys, they're in healthcare. Oh, speaking of healthcare, did you know that the Muslims invest in over 70% of all the senior living centers in America? Didn't know that. I thought that might appeal to this group. The villages in Florida. take a look and see who the investors are. Anybody here a pilot besides me? Okay? You know what a Cirrus aircraft is? Cirrus Design Corporation. Cirrus Aircraft is #2 behind Cessna in the manufacture of single-place aircraft in the world. Last summer, Cirrus, which was owned by the Muslim banks, decided to sell Cirrus Aircraft Company to the Communist Chinese. Gee, I wonder if there's a nexus. Caribou Coffee. Anybody have a Keurig coffee maker? You get the little pods. Caribou Coffee Company. Caribou's up there in Minnesota or Utah, I think it is. Owned by the Muslims. Caribou Coffee comes with a Keurig coffee makers. This comes right off of our Capita's website, ourcapita.com, the Sharia Advisory Board. Oh, look who is the head of their Sharia Advisory Board. We're back to our one-tooth guy, Justice Muhammad Taqi Usmani. So we've got funds from our Capita Corporation, profits that people in America invest in, pods, Cirrus Aircraft, places like that, that funnel 2.5% through Taqi Usmani, who then sends it to Middle East charities, and the SEC doesn't require them to tell them where the money went. Once it leaves the United States, it's gone. And you say 501c3. Caribou Coffee. It's on the NASDAQ. There's their website. There's their NASDAQ symbol, CBOU. Caribou Coffee Partners, Frontier Airlines, Keurig, here's the coffee maker right here, Midwest Airlines, Minnesota Vikings, maybe that's why they didn't do so well the last couple of years. USA Today, Sun Country Airlines, these guys are all invested in the Caribou Coffee Company. Who owns Caribou Coffee? They went public on September 30th, 2005. Stock trades on the NASDAQ. And on their website, they're very proud to tell you that our majority shareholder since 2000 is an affiliate of our Capita Bank in Bahrain. She's telling me I'm going too long. AIG. I'll just give you a brief rundown on AIG. Everybody knows who AIG is?
Yes.
You don't know who AIG is?
Oh, no, I do.
Oh, you do? Well, here's something you don't know. We had to bail them out, right, in 2008. We gave $182 billion. $42 billion of it went to their Dubai Muslim affiliate. $42 billion of your tax money went over to their affiliate in Dubai to bail out Muslims who had purchased oil contracts. So here's what happened, okay? They're an insurance company, right? They're either as big or bigger than Lloyd's of London. Well, what happened was when oil began to go up, if you'll remember, around 2007, and it went from about $70 a barrel and it hit 147. Well, you had oil brokers over there in the Middle East, and they were selling these oil contracts. Now, they couldn't call them investments or anything else because Allah wouldn't like that. So they were called oil contracts. And what would happen is you would come in there to one of these oil brokers, you'd give them $100,000, and you would buy either a 12 or a 24-month oil contract. They would guarantee you a profit, not interest, but a profit of 15–20%. So in 12 or 24 months, you would expect to go over there and say, okay, oil went from 70, went to 147. I want my 120,000. 20,000 profit on it. Well, the problem is, if you recall, that in 2008 and 2009, oil went back down to about 85, 90, where it's been ever since. Well, what happened is, all these oil brokers, they went bankrupt. Because people kept walking in there and saying, give me my money back, my principal and my profit, and they went bankrupt out of business. Well, what the oil brokers did was they reinsured the contract. So they went to AIG and said, okay, I'm going to owe this guy $120,000 in 24 months. I want you to insure that. The oil broker paid $5,000. These are rough numbers, $5,000 for the insurance premium to cover the oil contract. Well, when the oil brokers went out of business and oil dropped back down, who got left holding the bag? AIG. And they couldn't pay off all the oil contracts that they had insured. And since it's an American company and it's too big to fail, we had to bail them out, and we bailed out $42 billion to the Muslim entity in Dubai. You've got to start paying attention. We cannot be in denial anymore. We have a threat. It is a legitimate threat. It is getting worse every day. We got idiots like Chris Christie, who I wouldn't vote for dog catcher, who thinks that people like me are Islamophobes and we're full of crap, quote unquote. That's what the man said several months ago. And then he turns around and he appoints one of the guys on the executive board in Passaic, New Jersey, of CARE, who is an attorney to the Superior Court in New Jersey. Didn't hear that one on the news, did you? We have a guy named Arif Alakan, who was the deputy mayor of Los Angeles under another incompetent, Villaraigosa down there. And Arif Alakan was appointed by Obama and Janet Napolitano to sit on the executive board of Homeland Security. Are you clapping because I'm done, or you're happy with? Okay. She says I'm done. Then I'm done. Anyway, this is what's going on. You're going to have to start paying attention, because all we're getting in the media and from the administration is the tip of an iceberg, several icebergs now. And the pressure has got to stay on. And when you hear people talk about, well, let's do an interfaith, thing at a church or a temple or something like that, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. Jews and Christians don't kill each other anymore.
You only have time for 3 questions.
3 questions. 3 questions. Sounds like a Monty Python thing in the Holy Grail. Sir.
I'm wondering if you've felt a sense of physical risk because of the content of your message.
Oh, of course. I had 2 guys from the university right down the street from where I live a couple of years ago, and they would call me up and they would say, okay, we saw your lecture calendar, which is not on the website anymore, and if you lecture anymore and defend the prophet, we're going to come kill you. Well, one kid I never heard from again. I heard from the second kid, and it was actually kind of funny. And he told me the same thing. I said, instead of sitting here and threatening me, I said, why don't you just come to the lecture, come to the presentation, stand here with me, and we'll debate it. He said, well, I can't do that. Why not? He said, well, I don't drive. I said, I'll pick you up. And he said, you're crazy. And he hung up the phone. Never heard from him again. So, I'm not the only one. I'm trying to stay fairly under the radar. I basically talked to the Republican women's groups, Tea Party, 9/12, and I feel protected in that environment. But excellent question. Yeah, bring it up.
Can you give us just a couple of things that we individually can do to not only get the word out, but also what we can do to maybe put pressure on the banks and things like that to turn the tide, perhaps?
Yes. If you go on my website, islamthreat.com, and on the menu bar, there is a little bar there, menu item called Solutions.
Okay.
What? Oh, I have my webmaster. What?
It's not there.
Where is it?
It's gone.
Why is it gone? We have the 10 questions up there. All right, well, we'll have to put that back there.
Solutions are all gone.
Okay, there are things that you can do. For example, all these mosques are all 501c3. Under publication 15 of the IRS, under charities and religious institutions, and all you got to do is irs.gov, click on charities on their menu bar, go down to forms, get a copy of publication 57, publication 57. And that talks about your rights as a taxpayer to audit
501c3 charities and religious organizations. If you ask them for a copy of the last 3 years' tax returns, they have to give it to you. If you ask them for their articles of incorporation, because this is all public knowledge, most people don't know this, you will find out where the money came from to establish that mosque and who the principals are. Now, if anybody here is in the real estate business, who shall remain nameless, but if there's anybody here in the real estate business who has access to the database for a title company, all you got to do is put the address of the mosque in there and the title report will come up. Who owns it, what their mortgage happens to be, if there is one. I will tell you right now that 70 some odd percent of all of the mosques in the United States are owned by the North American Islamic Trust. They are funded by Saudi Arabia. All that money came from the Saudis. It's all petrodollars. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I got some, I can only absorb so much.
I understand. I understand.
One
Last
more-
question.
One more. Sue, Sherwood?
Well, I think she addressed a little bit of my concern. I was going to say that I dreaded coming here today because I knew I was going to be more depressed than usual. That's an understatement. But I was hoping that you would offer some of us some hope, because this is very frightening and almost like insurmountable. We got rid of the Nazis, but what can we do about this other than small things?
Ask questions and inform yourself. Knowledge is power. Ask questions. Okay? If you are listening to the news and you have a call-in thing like on Brian Sussman's show on KSFO or Huckabee or something like that, call in, ask questions. Get it out in the open. The problem is that the administration for many, many years now has kept that narrative and your questions subdued because they're in direct contradiction with their narrative. And the narrative obviously hasn't worked. It's a phony pseudo-narrative.
Is there a connection between this and the New World Order?
Oh, and ain't going back to Bush the Senior. You know something? We'll never know. We'll never know.
Or the UN Charter? Because if you read the UN Charter, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning.
If we should get that UN out of here and put them over in Africa someplace, as far as I'm concerned. Stop funding that organization. Okay.
So much. Is this one on? Here we go, right? We want to present you with our certificate of appreciation, presentation of excellent information on Islam threat to America. Peter, thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. Anybody would like to join and renew the NRA, I'm an NRA recruiter and I can sign you up right here today.
There we go. I'll take your microphone.
Hello? Not working? Okay. We have the lights back on, please. Okay. Okay, that was a lot to absorb, and but we're thankful that you could come. And I say, if you're a praying person, pray. Okay. We need to do just a little bit of business here. But anyway, I would just like to personally thank you, Peter and Rose, for coming here. And I know you have a son at Chico State. Is he graduate? Maybe?
Last semester.
Oh,
This is his last semester.
Oh, okay. Good. Well, congratulations on that. Anyway, we're happy to have you in Chico. And okay, so you have the minutes on your table. Hopefully you have taken a look at those. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Yes, Mary.
There's one here.